Welcome to the Bulletproof Cashflow podcast, the go-to place to gain financial freedom through real estate investing. Here we interview investors, mentors, and entrepreneurs who share their secrets and advice to help you build passive income. Let's get into the show.
Hey everyone, it's Augustino. The great thing about real estate is that there are so many ways to be successful as long as you are disciplined and stay in your lane. Some prefer to do big multifamily and others prefer to do small single family and small multifamily space. Well, today's guest, he followed that track. He started investing in real estate in 2010 and left a career as a commodities trader in New York in 2012 to pursue real estate full-time, purchasing and renovating single family and small multifamily properties. Over the past 9 years, he's been involved with over 100 real estate transactions, ranging from single-family homes to multifamily apartment buildings. He's the author of How Not to Make Money in Real Estate, which is a collection of real estate lessons to help new investors understand some of the hidden perils of real estate investing. And with all that, I'd like to welcome Allan Szlafrok to the show. Hey, man, thanks for coming on. Appreciate it.
Thanks. Really happy to be here.
Yeah, it's going to be great. So before we go on, if you like what Allan has to say, you can reach him via his Facebook page by searching for OG Property Investments. And if you like our content, please don't forget to leave a comment and rate the show. All right, Allan, go ahead and tell the listeners about how you got your start in real estate.
So like you said, I was a commodities trader at the New York Mercantile Exchange from like 2005 till around 2010, around the time of the financial crisis. And things weren't going too great for me. I was looking for another job, couldn't really get one, because no one on Wall Street was hiring at the time. Everybody was just shedding headcount. So I started investing with some friends of mine in the northern New Jersey area, and eventually I went out on my own. Saw a real huge opportunity to buy some of these houses below replacement costs. Banks were giving them away and nobody wanted them. And, from my experience as a trader, when everybody's selling, that's when you want to be buying. And when everybody's buying, that's probably when you want to be selling. So I saw that as a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to what I call buy America on sale. So that's what I did, and I've been doing that full time since around 2012. I've been involved in almost over 100 real estate transactions over the course of my career, and I plan on keep going.
Nice. Good. So in the green room, we're talking about doing small deals versus larger deals. And I know there's this huge emphasis on the bigger the better, syndicate, that kind of thing, which my group does that too. And we're also into smaller deals as well. Now, what's your take on all that? What do you think that smaller deals are better for you?
So I understand all about kind of why people like the larger scale deals because of the economics of scales, and you bring on a whole bunch of investors, and that's one way of doing it. But what I like about, let's say, the 2 and 3 family houses, I mean, first of all, the housing stock in my area, there's a ton of that here. There's probably more of those than there are single family houses as far as the towns that I invest in. But beyond that, I think of it as kind of a hybrid investment. You've got the multifamily aspect, you've got 2, 3 families, whereas if one tenant's not paying rent, you're not coming out of pocket for all the expenses. And also, when you turn around and you want to sell that property, first of all, they sell at a premium. Second of all, they're more attractive to somebody who's getting an FHA loan because they can use some of that income from the other unit that they're not living in towards their income to get a larger mortgage and to pay their mortgage. So I think that when you turn around and sell it, you have a wider buyer pool than you would with a single family house, and also versus a multifamily house where you're just dealing with savvy investors and sharks. So I feel like on the resale side, you wind up doing a lot better with some of these smaller multifamilies. You have a wider buyer pool, and people can afford to pay more money for them.
Right, you can also get in and out of them much quicker than you can with a bigger deal too.
Oh yeah, they're much more liquid. Yeah, that's for sure.
So you started off doing the renovation and all that, and you're still doing some of that today.
Yeah,
correct.
That's right.
So maybe go through, how do you select a property to renovate, and how do you decide what to renovate in these deals, especially in your neck of the woods where property values are a little more higher than what they are, say, in Cleveland, Ohio?
Yeah, that's for sure. They're definitely very expensive here. I mean, I use the same channels as everybody else. I've got a great network of brokers, and I've got the auction websites and the physical auctions if you want to do that. Wholesalers, you really have to be in touch with all sorts of people to find good deals, especially in this market where kind of everybody's in on it. It's not 2012, it's not 2013, it's not even 2016 anymore as far as how many properties are available. So you really got to be sourcing your deals from every manner of place, and you've got to look at hundreds of properties that aren't deals to find 1 or 2 that are. My criteria for selecting it is I like to be able to add a significant amount of value as well as having good rental income. Now, what does good rental income mean? That obviously depends on your goals, and it depends on your area and kind of what you can expect to get. You're not going to get 20% yields here in northern New Jersey and New York, off the bat. You're just not. You really have to add a lot of value to be able to do that. So I like to find a property where I know it's going to cash flow really well after debt service, and I can refinance most or all of my money out afterwards. And I also like to know that I'm adding a significant amount of value with my repairs towards the final resale price, if that's the direction I choose to go in, a couple years in the future, or maybe even right away if I want to flip it.
Okay. Now, what sort of assets are you targeting? Then you going after like the luxury, the C class? Like what exactly are you doing?
Definitely not luxury. I would say C plus B minus.
Okay.
And again, that's kind of just what these areas are. And I like that because, we have the option of taking some government subsidies as far as, Section 8 and programs like that. We sometimes, we have a mix of those, and that's one way to go. And we like to be near transportation, which is something that I think people discount a lot, especially northern New Jersey, where the economic engine of the entire area is New York City. So if you're a 2 block walk from the train station, you could be getting people that have pretty nice paying jobs in New York City, but who can afford to live in New York City?
Right.
That's where a lot of my tenants come from at this point. So these are all things I think about when I'm selecting a property is location. The quality of the house obviously is something that everybody looks into, but I'm looking for an area where people can be in and out of Manhattan in 30 minutes. So, that's another factor.
Yeah. It's interesting because I know that in New York, they just recently announced some rent control and all this crazy madness related to that. Has that been a driver for your business? Because I know that from an investor perspective, many investors are looking to invest out of New York now. Is the same thing happening as far as tenants are concerned? Like as far as finding places to live, that kind of thing, has that really impacted you at all?
So some of the areas that I deal with in New Jersey have been subject to some form of rent control since the beginning. And you work around it. And I think a lot of the investors in New York, after this panic ends, are going to learn to work around it. And they're going to learn, okay, we're accepting lower returns, but we're also never vacant. Like, can you imagine, like, if properties are underpriced, they're not going to stay vacant for more than 5 seconds. You're going to have 50 offers right away. So you have a little bit of a trade-off. I think the people that got hurt the most by the rent control thing are the landlords who were buying properties within the last couple of years below the cost of their money, saying, "Oh, I'll just kick these people out and I'll make more money." And that was never a nice thing to do to begin with, and eventually they made it an illegal thing to do. So those are the people who are really crying in their beers right now. And I'm not going to say I do or don't have sympathy for them, but you have to evolve in this business. And the government comes and they change the laws. You have to work around it. Should they have seen it coming? Probably. But as far as the tenants are concerned, they expect a high level of service in this area, and they'll go to the courts to enforce it. And if you're not the type of landlord who's going to comply with all the laws and regulations, you have no business being in business.
Right, right, right. And those landlords, are they local to New York then, or are they from out of state? I mean, because to me, I used to live in New York City, so I know a little bit about all the rent control and all that crazy stuff. I mean, I would have anticipated it, but I would never invest in New York. But I mean, are these guys also in New York? These investors, like, are they just not savvy or aware, or like, what's your take on that?
I think that people got complacent because things were the way they were for 50 years. And certainly for 30 years, I think the last time they made any sort of changes were. So people went about their business, and they are local, and they're almost exclusively local, and they are the savviest investors. And let's be honest, New York real estate has made more millionaires and billionaires than anywhere else, in the country, certainly.
Hmm.
But they got this one wrong. They definitely got this one wrong. They discounted kind of how hard they would come down on the laws, and now they have to work around it, and they're suing, whatever. They're going to have to learn to work around it. New York has never been a great place to invest for huge amounts of cash flow. Appreciation you've got over the last 30 years. I've lived here my whole life. I remember Brooklyn in the 80s and 90s. I grew up there, and it was not what people think about Brooklyn today. And it certainly didn't have $3 million townhouse. You could have bought a townhouse for nothing.
Yeah, that's right.
So you've had the huge amounts of appreciation. You're not going to have the huge amounts of appreciation anymore. There's going to be a shakeout. And as far as rents are concerned, no, you're not going to be able to raise rents a whole heck of a lot. But again, you won't be vacant. It's more of a solid blue cap that throws off 4 or 5%. That's the way you have to think about it. And for a lot of people, especially foreign buyers, that makes a lot of sense because it's fairly safe.
Yeah.
New York's not going away.
Exactly. It is still the center of the universe. It's still a great place. It's just a great city.
Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about financing then. So when you're putting these deals together and you're coming up with a renovation budget and you're purchasing the property itself, how do you structure financing? What sort of source do you use? And how does that typically look?
So personally, I have a line of credit with a large bank, and I'm able to just finance. I've got cash also, so I don't like to finance 100% of the purchase price and 100% of the construction with the line of credit. I do like to throw some cash in there so that while I'm getting these properties renovated and they're not being rented or half of it's being rented, I'm not really coming out of pocket. So I have that option, but a lot of people don't have that option, and they're paying for hard money loans, and all they know is they have to move really, really quick. I do too. So when I tap that line of credit, I've got to move pretty fast and I've got to get them done and rented as soon as I can.
Okay. Now, in terms of lending this with personal line of credit, no hard money, anything else like that. What are your thoughts about using hard money for the newbie that's out there right now? I mean, what are your thoughts around using hard money to get a deal done?
I mean, even I've used hard money, and I think that a lot of people, they don't really have a choice. I would rather you didn't. I would rather you see a newbie who's never done a deal, or maybe has done one and it was semi-successful. I'd rather see them raise money from one or two family members, friends, go in on it, especially if it's somebody you can partner up with that's got skills and talents that you don't have that'll really make the deal more successful. I think that's the way to go. But at the end of the day, people who are doing big volume, they're doing hard money loans. They're taking hard money because who's got money to finance 10 flips?
Right. That's right.
Most people don't. So if you have to do it, you have to do it. Understand that the money is expensive. Understand, because I see questions like on Bigger Pockets. It's like, when do I have to pay it back? A year. What happens if I don't? Read your contract. So people aren't as educated when they're going into some of these hard money deals as they should be. So really educate yourself on the terms, the fees, the risks involved that could delay your deal, and what happens if that happens. People really need to get better educated about what it means to borrow money from somebody like that.
Well, I think part of it is that the same way you committed to real estate, you quit a good paying job doing commodities to go into this full time. That takes a high degree of commitment. If you're just putting up a question on Facebook, or not on Facebook, but on Bigger Pockets of when do I have to pay it back? It's like, just like I said, read your contract. It's the terms are typically clearly explained in whatever it is that you're signing. And yeah, I think part of that is just a lack of commitment, even by the person asking. And it sounds a little harsh, but if you're going to be in this business and you're ill-informed, you're going to just get eaten up.
Absolutely. This business is a way bigger commitment than people think. And I was able to go ahead and do this full time. But I think that even people who don't do this full time, there's a lot more involved than they think. And that's why, they say, oh, all these problems that arise is because they weren't on top of the project. They weren't on top of the deal. My contractor stole from me. There was a break-in, all these things. It's because people weren't on top of the deal because they were half in, half out.
That's right. That's right. They weren't focused in it.
Right.
So let's talk a little bit about property management, because I know that's one of your core competencies. So when selecting a property management company, that's probably one of the biggest things. I mean, so we do our live meetups, and there's one guy that says, all property management companies are mediocre. You just got to find the one who's the least mediocre, which I think is an awful thing to say, but that seems to be, at least around here anyway. But how do you find a great management company? How do you identify them?
So personally, I think I got a little lucky. I was looking for a property management company at the same time as I have a friend who's in the same industry, and we don't really collaborate on deals, but we do share a lot of information, and we actually now share the same property manager, and he found him, and he wound up being really good. As far as what you're looking for, you obviously want somebody who's competent, has good reviews. I think when you're basically hiring somebody, and when you're hiring anybody, I think you want to get to know them on a more personal level. What's this person like? Because one of the worst things a property manager can do is obviously steal from you, and he says the toilet's broken and it's not broken, and he's charging you all these fees, and he's not reliable. So you want to get to know the guy or gal and figure out, is this a reliable person? Is this somebody who's on it? What are this guy's ideals and motives? So with my property manager, for example, I know he's a good guy. I know he's an honest guy. I know he's a family man. I know he's connected to his community and his church and whatever. So I think that when I'm looking for somebody, I want to get to know somebody on a personal level, and then I'll kind of get a better idea if this is somebody I can trust with my biggest investment in basically my entire business.
Right. So you have one property manager for your entire portfolio then?
Yeah, because all my portfolio is more or less localized, a few towns in the northern New Jersey area, a few cities. So he's able to handle all that. And he's a kind of a boutique firm. He's got me, my friend, and a handful of other investors plus his own stuff. So
Nice.
he's not like one of these nationwide guys that a lot of people look into.
And that's an interesting take. So many people opt for those bigger guys. I personally don't like the big nationals, only because I feel that if I were to go to them, even though we have a large portfolio, it's still small potatoes versus a REIT or someone like that. What's your take on that?
It depends where you are. I would rather deal with a mom and pop shop, but I've also dealt with, because I used to have a few investments in Florida and Georgia, and I dealt with some of the bigger guys, and I actually did not have a bad experience. But again, it was really small scale. It was like a couple of properties. But they, did the service calls when they were supposed to. They answered the emails as soon as they could, and I actually didn't have a bad experience. But again, I do want to get to know the values of the people that I'm dealing with, and that's a lot harder to do with a bigger firm. So again, it's a matter of personal preference. You just want the most competent guy.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. Tell me a little bit about KPIs, and do you usually meet up with your property management company on a regular basis and go through sort of numbers or other things like that to understand what's going on at a property?
I mean, I get bi-monthly reports, and then from there, if I have any questions, I can kind of go to him with that. Like, hey, why is this tenant late? What's going on over there? Why is my electric bill so high? Why is my water bill so high? And I'm local enough, and I've got enough autonomy where, like, if I want to go check out to see if there's a leak in the house, like, I can go ahead and do that, even if he'll do it. I'm in the area, I'll just do it anyway. So I do get bi-monthly reports twice a month, and we go over it. If I have any questions, I'll ask him, and he'll be honest with me, and he takes care of things. So again, I think I pretty much lucked out with this guy in particular, and yeah.
Nice. Now, what other advice would you have for someone that is trying to figure things out as far as property management is concerned? Do you have any advice for them? I find that many newbies, I often tell them the same thing: interview them, get to know the property manager, get to know what they're like, and if you can develop a level of trust. But what are your thoughts around that? Do you have any other advice aside from what you just said?
You do, even if you have a property manager, and I think this is something a lot of people don't understand, is you still need to be on top of the property, especially at the beginning, while you're developing this relationship with the manager and kind of settling into how he's managing the property. You want to be on top of him a little bit. And you want to be a little bit of a pain in the butt, at least at the beginning, until you develop that level of trust and honesty between the two of you, and he really understands the ins and outs of the building that he's managing. I think people need to be a little bit more hands-on with their manager. They need to be a little bit of a nudge and get in there and be on top of the guy.
Okay. All right. Let's talk a little bit about your book, How Not to Make Money in Real Estate. So clearly, it's a great title. Love it. Because it obviously says a lot about some of the folks out there that may have had some problems in the past and had to overcome it. So, first of all, how'd you find that awesome title?
I pulled it out of my head. I'm not gonna lie. I don't know. It made sense. I had like a whole bunch of things listed, and I was like, how not to make money. That stands out because I did want it to be something counter to what everybody else is selling and what everybody else is talking about. Everybody wants you to believe it's so easy, and I've gone through so many headaches in my career where it's like, well, it's nothing to be ashamed of because everybody goes through these kind of mishaps and mistakes and failures. If I can share with people so that they don't have to make the same mistakes, I think that's a great thing. And I think that's a great way to add value to people's careers in this industry. So I wanted a title that stands out, and I wanted something that nobody else is talking about. And that's kind of why I wrote the book. It was a little bit cathartic too. All the headaches I was dealing with and stuff like that. Just put it on paper. It felt really good just to kind of complain.
I think when you relive something, you also realize that you could have handled it a different way, right?
Right. And at the end of each lesson, I kind of have what I did wrong and what I should have done. And yeah, talking about the trauma makes it easier.
Yes, yes, yes. So maybe talk a little bit about the book itself. I know that it's a collection of stories. Some of them are humorous. Some of them are just glaring errors of judgment. But maybe share something from the book that's something that really stands out.
I think the one that I think newbies will connect with the most is kind of the first property I bought on my own after I stopped investing with those other guys. I relied on people's advice. I was like, is this a good neighborhood? Yeah, it's a good neighborhood. Don't worry about it. So, and the story goes, and it's in the book, we were supposed to close on, I think it was a Friday. And I go there to do the walkthrough on, I guess, Thursday. And the doors are locked. Everything's clean. I can't even get in. The realtor doesn't have the key. Oh, okay, it's locked. It's secure. I look in the windows. No problems. The closing was a close by mail on Friday, so I didn't even go down to the property. I didn't go to New Jersey on Friday. And then I come on Monday, and over the course of the weekend, somebody had broke in, kicked in the door, destroyed the entire house. I mean, did six figures amounts of damage to this house. Water heaters, boilers, everything ripped out, electric gone, basement flooded, kitchen cabinets smashed up for no apparent reason because there's no value in doing that. They just took out some anger. And what did I do wrong there? In this case, I relied on other people. It was a horrible neighborhood, it turns out. I didn't know it because I was just asking one person who didn't really know what he was talking about. Like, hey, what do you think? And he said it was fine. So I was like, okay, then it must be fine. When I should have been hanging around all times a day and talking to the postman and talking to the neighbors and things like that. If you are going to invest in an area that you know is a little bit hairy, security measures, they've got those metal gates you can use to secure the properties. I don't know who makes them, nationwide. We have companies here called, EBS. We have dogs. I think they're nationwide. And I should have done a better job securing the property. Alarm systems. I didn't do anything. I was just like, everything's going to be fine. So those were the mistakes I made with that property, for example. And that was my introduction to real estate. Was just complete disaster on the first deal. I had this I paid, I think, $150,000 for it. three family was going to cash flow like $3,000 a month, grand slam. And now I've got $100,000 worth of repairs. I had insurance, but still, it set me back big time. And it was definitely a wake up call that this industry wasn't going to be as easy as I thought it was going to be.
Right. And insurance covered you, right? So you're at least okay for that.
Yeah. I didn't really come out of pocket, but it was a headache. It was a real nightmare. And then the property, we had problems with the tenants. The tenants were getting mugged, and there was a murder up the street. Like, it was horrible.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
I mean, nowadays, I don't know when that property was bought, but nowadays there's other tools like Spot Crime or citydata.com and all these different places, right?
I will tell you a funny story about that. I own a property in a very safe area in Jersey City, but right on my block, it was darker blue. That means like there's more crime, right?
Yeah.
Like on Spot Crime. And I'm like, what are all these crimes here? So it turns out my contractors set off my burglar alarm twice coming in too early. And those were the crimes there. So I caused all the crime in the neighborhood. So my point is, they're not terribly reliable. You really have to get on the street. You really have to talk to the people in the neighborhood, and they'll tell you what's going on. It's nice. It's a nice way to get a general overview of kind of what the safest areas are, but that doesn't get you on a block-by-block basis. Because again, perfectly safe area. I set off my burglar alarm twice. Now I'm the highest crime place in the entire neighborhood.
It's your fault.
It's all my fault. So you really have to do a better job than just using some of these online tools. They're really not that great.
Yeah, you know what? And I think that you just hit the nail on the head when it comes to finding out information about a property. People I'm not sure if they get scared to talk to the neighbors, or they just feel weird about asking a complete stranger about how the neighborhood is like. And that's one of those necessary things you just have to do.
Can't be shy.
Yeah, you can't be shy, especially in this business. I mean, the last thing you want to do is ruin an opportunity with all your money, or if it's even worse, your investors' money because you're afraid to ask the neighbor about the neighborhood and how bad or good it might be.
If you were taking investor money and you weren't doing that, I mean, I call that gross negligence. That's really bad.
Yeah.
You have to talk to people. You have to talk to business owners and things like that. And that's the best you can do. Again, you're just doing one of these satellite overviews of the crime in a neighborhood, and the demographics of a neighborhood, and the jobs of the neighborhood. It's not good enough. You really do need to dig a lot deeper than that.
That's right. So now what other resources are you looking at aside from now crime? You learned your lesson with this property. What other resources are you looking at when you're assessing a property and trying to decide if you want to get in on a deal or not?
So as far as the neighborhoods are concerned, I'm hyper local. I'm only really in a few towns, and I know those towns cold. So that's not really an issue. Like block by block, I kind of know. But when it comes to the actual properties themselves, you really want to make sure it's free of liens and judgments from the town, and water bills, and code enforcement violations are a big one. That's in the book too. I once bought a property on auction.com and really cheap, and then it turns out, and I didn't check beforehand, which I could have done by either calling them or submitting an opera request, which is something I do all the time now. $200,000 worth of code enforcement violations. The house was not going to be worth $200,000, and the town was giving me a horrible time. In the end, we settled, but it still cost me money. It cost me, I don't know, $6,000, $8,000, whatever it was. That's out of the budget, so that's not good. But nowadays, before I buy a property, I'm calling the town. Is this zoned correctly? Are there any violations? And then I'll pull up, permits to make sure all the permits are closed from the previous owners. Because if they're not, and there's a problem, it's your problem. So you have to understand that when you buy a property, you're buying all the problems from the owner before it. And that's something I do a really careful job. Is this subject to rent control? Is it, again, the violations, the liens? Title search is not going to come back with code enforcement violations. It doesn't. You have to call them. And again, if they don't pick up the phone, opera request. And it takes 2 weeks, but still, do it.
That's right. Yeah, it's doing that due diligence again, aside from driving there, talking to neighbors, doing the deeper digging about all these other things that might still be hanging out there that you have no idea until after you buy it. Next thing you know, you get the letter sent to the office with...
That's right. Environmentals is a big deal over here, especially underground oil tanks. I've been tripped up by those before too. I've also nipped a bunch in the bud after I, got tripped up. So that's something I learned the hard way, and that I'm hoping people kind of avoid in the future. So I've got, a great team of people. They'll come with the oil tank sweep, and they'll do the removal, and they'll do the testing of the soil to make sure that I'm not going to have a $50,000 problem, that it's a $3,000 removal, not a $50,000 Exxon Valdez oil spill on the property. So these are all things I think people, and again, I see posts from newbies online. I just bought a property, there's a leaking oil tank. What do I do? Well, I mean, would you buy a property with a leaking oil tank? Maybe if they took $20,000 off the price, because that's, the average cost of a decent sized remediation, but you didn't. So you should have asked that question 6 months ago.
Right. And that leaking oil tank stuff, that typically happens in these older cities like Cleveland, New Jersey, New York.
Yes,
They'll have Detroit, Michigan. They'll have all these older tanks because back then heat used to be run off of heating oil.
that's right. Or coal.
Right.
I've seen some coal furnaces, but those aren't really a problem. That's just a piece of metal you take out. But these underground oil tanks is probably the number one threat to some of these older cities, like you said, Cleveland and Detroit and New York City and Newark and Jersey City. The typical house I buy is probably 100 years old. So the odds of it having an underground oil tank are pretty high. Now, if you live in like South Florida and you invest there, like it's not really a problem. You have other problems. You have hurricanes and sinkholes and areas like Florida, but like unique to kind of our cold weather areas, that's a big one. And I think people are a little bit cavalier about it. Like, okay, I'll remove it. It's $3,000. Like, it's either 3,000 or it's 50,000. So be a little bit more careful when you're, an environmental search is very, very important. And when you go to refinance, they're going to ask you for that anyway.
So if there's no tank there, does that mean that it was probably eliminated or removed previously or what?
Yeah, and you also want to check to make sure who removed it and if it was removed legally. Listen, it could have been removed like 25 years ago. It doesn't matter at that point. If it's not there, they're not going to come and like test the soil to make sure it was removed correctly, probably. But, if it was removed 5 years ago and the permit's still open because they failed the inspection and they just whatever ignored it, like that happens. You really have to check with all the closed and open permits on a property that you're buying.
Yeah, due diligence is super, super, super important.
That's right. Oh yeah.
I mean, it's important on a multifamily deal, and a big multifamily deal. It seems like it's just as important on these smaller deals as well. It's critical. I think that's where your money is made.
Yeah, but people only pay lip service to it, and it goes a lot deeper than kind of people think.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think it's just the way you said. They just think that, I just buy it. Everything's going to be fine. I'm just going to stick a tenant in there and away you go. And
Not how it works.
No, that's just not how it works. Not how it works. So, getting back to something you said right at the beginning, when you got out of the commodities business and things weren't going so hot, there's a lot of talk these days about recession, and people have been saying there's going to be a recession. There's going to be a recession in 24 months and been saying the same thing for the last 24 months and nothing's really happening. You've been through a cycle now. So what's your take? What do you think is going to happen? And do you think there's the recession coming? Do you think it's going to be sooner than later? And how are you preparing for it if you are?
Right. So the relevant question is how are you preparing for it? Because there's always a recession coming. Economic cycles typically last less than 10 years. Here we are in the year 10 of the expansion. I mean, I have an MBA, but I'm not an economist, and even economists don't know what they're talking about. 100 people give an opinion. The one guy who's right at the end of it becomes a rock star. The one guy who predicted the housing crash out of 50,000 people, just because he was being contrarian, he may not even know what he was doing, becomes a rock star for the next 50 years.
Yeah.
So I think that economists are very bad at timing recessions, and they're certainly bad at predicting pretty much anything. It's more art than science. But if you are concerned, and you should be, because we are late in the cycle, you need to be a little more conservative with your underwriting. See, I wouldn't tell people not to buy anything. A deal is a deal, but you have to be able to stress test that against what could happen in a recession. Is it going to be a horribly deep recession like we had the last time? There's a small percent chance of that. There's a much larger percent chance you can have one of the typical recessions. You need to stress test your portfolio and your acquisitions against what could happen in a recession. What if rents dip 10%? What if property prices dip 20%? Versus 10%, versus 5%, whatever. But you really have to stress test these things when you're doing an acquisition. And for the properties you already have, put yourself in a position, lower expenses, pay off some other debt if you can, to be in a sort of defensive position so that if a recession happens, there's no reason to go bankrupt in a recession unless you're over leveraged. So that's the number one thing, is leverage conservatively, get the best rate you can, pay off debt you can, have adequate reserves, and you'll survive a recession. It won't be fun, but you'll survive and you'll come back stronger. And hopefully you've still got some, dry powder to do some acquisitions at the end of it.
Yeah. And you talked about that too, is when America is on sale, that's going to happen again. How did you prepare for that? For all these deals that suddenly cropped up? How'd you line up the capital you needed to take that stuff down?
I mean, I was lucky I had saved some money from, my old job before it kind of went away. So I had some capital, and then I got the experience, and then I was able to evaluate these deals and be like, I cannot believe they're giving away these houses for this price. Because to build that house, even in the middle of the recession, was twice as much money. So how is this not a deal? And then you're looking around like, why isn't everybody else doing it? Because it was the scariest time to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of people who are talking about the recession are almost rooting for a recession because they're like, oh, I'm going to buy all these houses at 50% off. Like, where were you 10 years ago? Were you buying 10 years ago? Because if you were too scared then, you're probably going to be too scared now. And it's kind of weird to see a lot of people cheering, for a recession.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because there was one gentleman that I know, he wants to get into the business. He's not even in the business yet. He's thinking about it. And he was told by another real estate person that he should wait it out and wait till there's a recession, then start buying then. And my advice to him was, either you're in the game today or you're not, because when there is a recession, it's going to be exceedingly difficult. You're going to be going up against people like you that buy stuff. You buy stuff today, you're going to be buying stuff tomorrow,
right,
versus someone who's green that's never bought anything in their life, and they won't get to buy it because it'll still be competitive, even in a downturn.
That's right. There'll be more inventory, but there'll still be people like me looking for deals. And again, if you're not, you're either in or you're out. If you're not buying now, you're not going to buy then because you're going to have another excuse.
Right.
Or somebody else is going to talk you out of it. Your wife, your mother, whatever. There's always somebody telling you not to do something. If you want to get involved in this business, start doing it now, but be very conservative with your underwriting and be very conservative with your financing because we are not at 2010, 2012, 2013 levels. So be conservative, get involved. And even if you don't do a deal between now and the next recession, whenever that is, be in the game. Be learning and just get in the marketplace no matter how you can.
Right. And that's another thing too, not just learning by sitting back and listening to a podcast. Not that I mind you guys listen to podcasts, but also
please do.
But getting out there, talking to people, walking deals, getting in front of brokers, all that. That's huge when it comes to this business. If you're not visible, you don't exist. Unfortunately, that's just how it is. Yeah.
That's right.
Now, what sacrifices had you had to make, you personally, when you first started out in this business, and compared to what you're at now?
So, everybody starts off slow. Nobody gets to where they are 10 years from, at the beginning. So I wasn't making a lot of money at the beginning. I only had a handful of properties making me money, and I had to borrow money, and I went into credit card debt, and I was always worried about the bills until one day I got to a point where the properties were paying me enough where I was living nicely and I was building equity. But at the beginning, because I was relying on this as my sole source of income because I wasn't getting another job, it hurt. It hurt for quite a few years. It really did. So a lot of people are on the fence about doing that. Here's a reason why maybe you should stay on the fence, because if you can't make a living, you're going to go through a lot of pain, just like I did.
Yeah. So
maybe hang on to that job. And then, once you have a couple of deals under your belt and you really want to go in full time, then you can do it. But make sure that there's no reason to get into huge credit card debt and have the kind of problems
I think that's
it
though too,
years.
Right? Is that many people don't want to make that sacrifice. And I think that's what it really is. That's what it really boils down to. And, part of it is though, if you execute it right, just like what Allan said, you're able to build a lot of success in this business and hopefully gun for that financial freedom, which is something that all the listeners here are rooting for. Everybody wants that financial freedom. That's exactly what they want.
That's right.
All right. Well, very good. Well, if you guys want to follow up with Allan, you can reach him via his Facebook page at OG Property Investments. Okay. And don't forget to check out his book too. I'll include a link in the description. Okay. Hope you got a lot of great insight on property management, even selecting deals. Thank you for your time, man. I really, really appreciate it.
Thank you. I had a great time. Thanks.
Thank you for listening. We hope you enjoyed the Bulletproof Cashflow podcast. For more free podcasts, articles, videos, and resources, go to www.bulletproofcashflow.com.